Hello friends, today we're going to discuss the B word in divorce proceedings. That's right, bifurcation. In the context of a divorce proceeding, a bifurcation is a legal term when the parties decide to split some of the legal issues so that they can be addressed separately at a later date. Sounds a little complicated, but it's not that bad, and it may be a good piece of information to know. So we're going to get into that now. Welcome back to the Divorce Broadcast. My name is Manny Segarra, coming to you from Miami, Florida. All right, as I just mentioned, a bifurcation essentially allows the divorce court to enter either a partial or interim judgment on some of the specific issues while other issues are still pending or unresolved. It involves a partitioning or bifurcation of the divorce process. Oftentimes, it allows for a dissolution of marriage, meaning that you actually get divorced officially, while other issues are pending, like property division, alimony, child custody, child support, and things that are not resolved and still pending. It is a great process for those that want to get officially divorced sooner rather than later. However, realize that some of these other issues will remain pending. All right, before we move on, let's talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of bifurcation. First and foremost, not all states allow for bifurcation of the divorce process. So you must check your particular jurisdiction to see if that court allows for the bifurcation of a divorce process. In addition to that, if there is a state that allows for bifurcation, remember that the divorce court has a lot of discretion. So ultimately, the judge will decide if part of the case should be resolved immediately or soon, or whether or not the entire case has to be resolved before a final judgment is entered. In addition to that, in the states in which bifurcation is allowed, the parties can agree to bifurcation. That means that both sides are okay with it. Or if they disagree, then the party seeking bifurcation will have to file a motion and have it heard before the court, oftentimes which requires an evidentiary hearing. And final food for thought, there are jurisdictions in the country that will not allow for bifurcation unless all of the children's issues are resolved. So you have to check your particular jurisdiction and the statutes that are applicable. Whenever the issue of bifurcation comes up as a possibility in one of our cases, I am often asked, does bifurcation happen a lot? Well, I will say that bifurcation is not always granted, and it depends oftentimes on the laws and the procedures in the jurisdiction where the divorce takes place, as well as the specific factual circumstances of the case that is pending. The court will always consider factors such as the reasons behind the request, as well as the interests of both parties and the effects that a bifurcation may have on the minor children involved in the case. Let's address some of the common scenarios in which a couple may seek a bifurcation of the divorce process. The first of which is when the court dissolves the party's marriage but reserves jurisdiction to address either the division of assets and liabilities, alimony, and the children's issues. In this case, the court would enter a final judgment dissolving the party's marriage, and all of those other pending issues will be addressed later. Another common example is when there is a dispute about a marital asset. Let's say that one of the parties owned a business, and now the other spouse is requesting that the court determine that that business be allowed to be part of the equitable distribution scenario or format. Then the court could conceivably bifurcate that particular issue and say, we're going to dissolve the marriage, we're going to do equitable distribution, but first, before we figure out equitable distribution, we need to have a separate hearing. So we're going to bifurcate the determination of whether or not that business is a marital asset. One of the other common scenarios that involve bifurcation is when there's an alimony claim. Oftentimes the couple will have their marriage dissolved. Perhaps they were able to agree on equitable distribution of the assets and liabilities, and maybe they were even able to agree on a parenting plan and resolve all of the children's issues, which would only leave the alimony claim as the pending matter. Or maybe they would want the court to determine the alimony claim in order to resolve some of the other remaining parts of the case. In this situation, which happens often, is that the court would make the alimony determination separately after the parties have already been divorced. And another final common example of bifurcation is when the children's issues are bifurcated. It is, in theory, conceivable to have the parties' marriage dissolved, their equitable distribution of their assets and liabilities done, alimony resolved, and then the only issues remain are the children's issues. This happens sometimes when there's a guardian ad litem involved, or when there are issues involving the children that require a little bit more time to figure out. Maybe, the parents are attending either substance abuse counseling or mental health counseling, or maybe there are some issues with the children, either medical issues or mental health issues with the children. Now we're going to get into some of the more interesting stuff about the reasons behind why people ask for a bifurcation or a dissolution of their marriage while other issues are pending. The prime example is when there is a prenuptial agreement. Remember, oftentimes when a parties execute a prenuptial agreement, inside that agreement it says that there will be a bifurcation of divorce proceedings by which all of the property that is already divided under the prenuptial agreement will be divided automatically, and that the prenuptial agreement issue has to be addressed immediately. So the courts will oftentimes bifurcate whether or not to enforce the prenuptial agreement, and if they're enforced, parties have to abide by what's in there, which includes division of assets and liabilities that were premarital, as well as oftentimes whether or not anybody's going to get alimony. So that's reason number one, if there's a prenup. One of the other main reasons in which a party may seek the court to bifurcate the proceedings is if there's a medical illness involved in the case. This often happens when one of the spouses is elderly and may have a ailment, some sort of dementia, maybe they have a heart condition or renal failure, or maybe they have some sort of terminal illness like cancer or something to that effect. When there's a medical condition that is serious and may cause the party to either pass away or become very sick during the proceedings, a motion to bifurcate the proceedings is proper, because then that spouse who's affected by that illness will be allowed to get their marriage dissolved and have all of the issues that are remaining dealt with later. This would be very helpful to that spouse, because then they can get their end of life scenarios in place. In line with what we just talked about, oftentimes people ask for bifurcation to secure benefits and survivorship rights. It's important to note that sometimes when there are financial accounts that are in play in a divorce, some of the standing orders or some of the status quo orders do not allow the parties to divert those assets to their children or their descendants without a bifurcated order of divorce. One of the other situations in which a bifurcation is requested is if one of the spouses that is in the divorce wants to get remarried. Now, I'm not going to comment on whether or not getting remarried while you still haven't divorced your other spouse is a good idea, but nonetheless, if one of the parties wants to get remarried, they need to get divorced before they can, so they can ask the court to dissolve the marriage, which would bifurcate the dissolution part away from all of the other pending issues, which could be the division of the other stuff, the assets, liabilities, and any children's issues. Similar and in line with what we just discussed, there may be some religious or cultural reasons behind a bifurcation request. In some cases, individuals may have religious or cultural beliefs that require them to formally get divorced as soon as possible. Another prime example of when a bifurcation may be helpful to a couple involved in a divorce is if there's a complex business or asset involved in a case. One example may be that if the couple has a large business that has hundreds of employees and they produce some sort of equipment, it will take time for the business to be evaluated, for the financials to be understood and reviewed so that there can be an actual price put on the business, as well as how the business is going to wind down. If one of the couple is going to buy out the other couple, maybe they're going to work together, or maybe they have to sell it. So when it's this type of complex asset, it may take a little bit more time. So it may benefit the couple to dissolve their marriage, resolve all the issues involving the children with that bifurcation order, and then resolve the complex business part of it. This is especially true if there's intellectual property. Let's say that there is a celebrity who has some sort of either songbook or some sort of pending album that's coming out. This is something that cannot be resolved right now. It's something that needs to be resolved once those songs are either valued or they come out or they're published. At that point, that asset can be evaluated and then divided. Another great example is if one of the spouses files for bankruptcy during a divorce. Sometimes when one of the spouses involved in a divorce files for bankruptcy, it may stay the proceedings because the couple is still married. In that type of situation, by bifurcating the case and dissolving the marriage, the bankruptcy proceeding may continue forward. In the states and jurisdictions in which they allow for bifurcation of the children's issues, if there are complicated children's issues, a bifurcation may be useful. Perhaps the parenting plan can't be figured out right away, or perhaps one of the parents doesn't have the proper accommodations for the child. A court could assist the parties by bifurcating that part of it if the bifurcation of children's issues is allowed. Finally, I believe one of the biggest benefits of bifurcation is the emotional closure for those that think that they need to be divorced. It's a great way of you getting divorced and then dealing with all the other stuff later. However, it may come back to bite you because just because you're divorced doesn't mean that your case is over. Your case can continue if the other stuff isn't resolved. So don't think just because you got divorced, the case is over. But you would get divorced, and if there's any emotional baggage or any emotional tumult or issues with that, you will be able to resolve it because you'll officially be divorced. All right, before I sign off on the bifurcation issue, just a quick recap. Remember that not every state allows for it, so check your local jurisdiction. Also, judges have a lot of discretion, so just because you can do it doesn't mean they will allow it. And finally, as I mentioned previously, just because you bifurcated your case, it doesn't mean your case is over. One of the cons of bifurcating your case is that once one of the spouses is divorced, they might be like, okay, check out of the proceedings. I don't need to comply with the finances or show my financial information or proceed. No, you must continue and you must finish your case. So keep an eye out for all of that stuff. Very well. So that's an official wrap on bifurcation of divorce cases. If you know anyone that would find this information useful, or if they want to get divorced sooner rather than later, have them look us up at www.segarralawfirm.com. We have offices in Miami and Orlando, Florida. Se habla español. Please do us a favor and like this video, subscribe to the Divorce Broadcast, drop us any comments that you may have so that we can respond to you, and we will see you again soon. Thank you.